Welcome to Alpha Recap. With markets closed for the weekend, let's look at what happened on Friday and what it means heading into next week. As always, if you have questions, you can reach us at stockalpha.ai.
Thanks. Plenty to unpack from Friday. A market milestone, some big insider moves, and a pivot story tied to Microsoft that grabbed attention.
Let's start with the big picture. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed above 50,000 on Friday. That felt symbolic. How should listeners think about that number?
Hitting 50,000 was important because milestone levels tend to matter to investors and money managers. When an index hits a record, it can pull in passive flows, trigger rebalancing in multi-asset funds, and generally make risk appetite a little stronger. It also compresses implied risk premia. Basically, investors are willing to pay a bit more for the same earnings, which makes company-level headlines more likely to move prices.
So when the index is at a record, a single company story can feel bigger than usual.
Exactly. On a normal day, an insider sale or a governance filing might be a small squall. At a milestone like this, those squalls can ripple more widely because investors are reassessing risk versus reward at high valuations.
Speaking of insider moves, Ameriprise's CEO sold a large block of stock on Friday. $26.6 million, if I recall. That made headlines.
It did. A CEO sale of about $26.6 million is the sort of number that draws immediate questions. Investors ask whether it's routine tax planning, diversification, or whether the insider is signaling concern about the stock. The honest answer is usually context matters. You want to pull the Form 4 to see how many shares were sold and what percentage of total holdings that represented.
And there were other insider moves that day too. An Axos financial director sold roughly $1.1 million, and the general counsel at Sophie bought $105,000 of stock. That looks mixed.
Right. When you see big sales and smaller buys on the same day, it creates noise. The SoFi buy is actually a useful counterpoint. Insider buys tend to signal confidence, but the market often focuses on size. A multi-million-dollar CEO sale gets headlines and can cause short-term pressure, while a six-figure buy by a general counsel is more muted. The key is to look at patterns over time, not just single trades.
For listeners who trade these stories, what concrete steps should they take?
First, pull the Form 4 filings for the companies involved. That will show the exact share counts and prices. Second, check for any accompanying 8K disclosures that explain the reason. Third, look at historical insider activity to see whether this is part of a plan, like scheduled sales or something out of the blue. That gives you better context than headlines alone.
There were also governance items. T1 Energy replaced its chief accounting officer. Coupang disclosed a possible director resignation if Kevin Walsh is confirmed as Fed chair. And there was an amendment to a Schedule 13D for Plymouth Industrial REIT. Those sound like potential catalysts.
They are. Board changes and amended Schedule 13D filings tend to attract event-driven traders because they often precede more substantive actions, everything from strategic reviews to activism. An amended Schedule 13D usually means someone is taking a larger stake or clarifying intentions, and that can be a real catalyst for share price moves. With multiple governance items in the same session, the market was primed for idiosyncratic volatility.
Let's pivot, no pun intended, to the Iren story. Reports said Iren was moving away from Bitcoin mining toward building Microsoft-backed AI data centers. That pushed the stock higher on Friday. What should listeners make of that?
Narrative-wise, it was a strong move. Microsoft's cloud and AI expansion is a major demand driver, and aligning with that story can re-rate a company. But there's a big gap between a press report and signed contracts. Building AI-ready data centers requires heavy capital expenditure and operational expertise, so the immediate reaction was sentiment-driven. The real test will be whether Iren can produce contracts financing plans, and timelines that investors can trust.
So what would count as confirmation?
A formal announcement from Microsoft or a signed partnership agreement, detailed capex guidance from Iren, and a credible financing plan. Absent that, you have to assume the move was largely speculative. Investors priced in the possibility of a deal, not the deal itself.
We also saw some extreme moves in microcaps. LAMV Plus jumped a large amount to a couple of cents on very light volume, and another name plunged almost half. How should retail listeners approach that kind of action?
Microcap volatility is its own beast. A jump of around 60% to 2 cents on 18,000 or so shares, or a fall of about 45% on 12,000 shares, tells you liquidity was thin and price moves were amplified. For traders, that means execution risk is high and stop losses can be unreliable. For most investors, it's better to be cautious. These swings rarely affect the broader market but can wipe out retail positions quickly.
Pulling the threads together, what patterns did Friday reveal?
3 themes stood out. 1, AI and cloud continued to act as a re-rating catalyst. The Iren report linked to Microsoft is a prime example. 2, governance and event risk were front and center. Multiple filings and board-level headlines create a near-term environment where company disclosures, not macro data, are likely to drive volatility. And 3, insider signals were mixed. Large CEO sales contrasted with smaller insider buys, so you needed context from the filings to decide whether to worry.
Given the Dow closed above 50,000, how might that change reactions to Monday's open?
When an index is at a record, investors tend to be more sensitive to downside news because valuations are already elevated. That increases the odds of profit taking if negative headlines hit. So on Monday, the things to watch were the Form 4s for Ameriprise and Axos, any 8Ks or press releases from Iren and Microsoft, and the full text of the amended Schedule 13D for Plymouth Industrial REIT.
Quick practical checklist for listeners heading into the next session.
Sure. 1, pull the Form 4s for the big insider trades to see percentages sold. 2, read the Schedule 13D amendment to understand an activist's intent. 3, watch for any 8Ks or press releases confirming Iren's relationship with Microsoft and any capex or financing details. 4, be mindful of liquidity. Watch volumes if you trade microcaps. And 5, monitor options implied volatility around the names that could see hedging flows like Ameriprise.
Before we close, a few clear takeaways for listeners.
First, the market backdrop was constructive. The Dow closing above 50,000 supported risk appetite, but that also made company-specific headlines more potent. Second, large insider sales deserve scrutiny, but rarely tell the whole story without Form 4 context. Third, pivot stories tied to major cloud players can lift sentiment quickly, but you should wait for contracts and capital plans before assuming a re-rating is permanent. Finally, microcap moves are noisy and risky. Trade them only with appropriate risk controls.
Great. That wraps up our recap of Friday's market action. If you have questions about anything we covered today, head to stockalpha.ai, where you can ask us directly, and we'll answer live. For more market analysis and insights, visit stockalpha.ai. Thanks for listening, and have a good weekend.